Hey everyone, my name is Ian McCarthy, and I'm the owner of No Bullshit Bodybuilding and Lifting for Life, the channel you're watching. And I'm here today with two gentlemen that are way beyond me in both qualification and knowledge. So I've been, as I said last time in the video that didn't make it online, I've been artificially elevated in stature to that of these two gentlemen. Alan has been here before, and Eric Helms is our newest guest, and well, I'll start with Alan. Alan has a master's in nutrition, so that means he knows more than you do. And and Eric is about to get a master's, a few weeks away, yeah? And then within a year, he'll have another one, which is going to be received as part of some research he's doing in New Zealand on protein intake for athletes, resistance athletes, yes?
Lean, resistance athletes in a caloric deficit.
Woo! So finally some research that is relevant to training populations, bodybuilders essentially.
Yep.
Today we're going to discuss protein intake, both in a general sense, and then we're going to narrow it down to bodybuilders and narrow it down to those in contest preparation. And Eric is going to start off with a discussion of the RDA and some of the limitations of nitrogen balance research. So take it away, Eric.
Sure. So the recommended daily allowance of protein is currently 0.8 grams per kilogram. And for those of you who are not metric system savvy, there's 2.2 pounds per kilogram, and this equates to roughly, I think, Ian, you said, 55 grams of protein for the average size male?
Yes.
So a whole 2 scoops away if you had it with milk. Not a whole lot. And then don't eat anything else for the rest of the day except oil. So RDA, where does that come from? Well, the vast majority of all of the protein requirements that we've found are from a methodology of measuring protein in people called nitrogen balance. So of the 3 macronutrients, protein is the only nitrogen-containing compound. And so, therefore, if you measure the amount of nitrogen in the dietary protein and compare it to the amount of nitrogen that is coming out of the body in feces, urine, sweat, other obligatory losses, skin contact with barbells. That was actually one that I saw in the research. Say again?
Fapping losses of nitrogen.
Yeah, exactly. And that depends on seminal fluid volume and lots of other variables that we measure as grad students. Cannot wait to start my degree.
Seminal fluid is mostly glucose, so it's not a big protein loss.
And I've already made myself look like a fool. Damn it. How dare Ian know more about semen than I do?
Well, we're off to a good start.
All right. So anyway, we got this methodology of measuring nitrogen, and this tells us, well, at least researchers for a long time have assumed this tells us how much protein we should be taking in. Well, in reality, what nitrogen really tells you is, the whole body, are we losing or gaining more nitrogen than we're taking in? Thus, are we in nitrogen balance? Are we in a negative nitrogen balance? Or are we in a positive nitrogen balance? And that is relevant. It's useful, but it's only relevant in what it tells you. For example, there's some pretty significant limitations. This doesn't tell you what's going on specifically in muscle tissue. And just to throw some things out there, so like the intestines turn over very quickly. So the small intestine is turning over at a much faster rate than other parts of the body, so you might not be knowing where is this negative nitrogen balance or positive nitrogen balance, for that matter, coming from. It also doesn't tell you really about what is optimal, as taking in protein has a lot more to do with just fulfilling our nitrogen requirements. There was a guy, DJ Millward, I think, a researcher for a long time ago. Is it Millward, Alan? The guy?
Are you talking about the 2008 study that showed that even under conditions of positive nitrogen balance, fat-free mass was lost? Or is that a different author? You probably know the name of that author.
That's a Pokoski, actually. But that's one too. That's a good point. I think it's DJ Millward. Hold on. I can answer that question real quick. I don't know if this is essential to the conversation.
But it's the fact that nitrogen balance does not necessarily mean that you've optimized muscle protein synthesis.
Right. So this guy who I'm blanking on his name, and I'm pretty sure it's Millward, he basically said, protein, if you take it in, it has hormonal effects in the body and downstream effects on all other kinds of processes. And the optimal intake is not the same as the minimum required to maintain nitrogen balance. And in fact, an RDA for protein based on nitrogen balance may not actually be an RDA in the traditional sense. It more be telling us more what is the minimum before we actually start losing body tissue.
Yeah.
So Eric, would you say that nitrogen balance as a method tends to underestimate nitrogen losses? Or is it more accurate to say it tends to underestimate muscle protein status, muscle protein balance?
Did you just make that term up? Muscle protein balance. It sounds good.
Well, yeah, probably both. I would probably say both. If you look at the research, they will say it underestimates, nitrogen losses, and like you were saying, and that's how they explain it. But I think the biggest problem with it is just that researchers are using it as a proxy very frequently for muscle protein breakdown or muscle protein synthesis, or sometimes, most egregiously, as just muscle gain, or muscle loss.
It's not tissue specific. That's the biggest issue here. If you're talking about muscle, completely different than saying whole body nitrogen retention. So it's I think isn't the RDA considered a minimum though? Isn't that what it isn't that what it is? Is you have to hit that number as a minimum, or am I missing the point of an RDA?
Well, let's see. There's the EARs, there's the AIs, there's the RDAs. They just changed this on me as soon as I got out of my nutrition classes. Alan, you're a smart guy.
Well, the sort of thing that sticks out with me with the RDA is they spit out all this extremely ancient crap in the DRI handbook, and then they sort of disclaim it all by saying the RDAs are neither final, minimal, nor optimal. So they're basically saying, okay, we're taking our hands off of this one. This is our best guess right now. But you see the RDAs being a good 10 years, so usually more, behind the current research as far as what is maintaining fat-free mass in folks. And there's a bunch of research by Donald Lehman comparing the RDA versus double the RDA on various indexes like lean mass retention, strength, even some metabolic and health-related indexes, showing that double the RDA always just wins out the RDA. So,
Well, the funny thing about the RDA to me is that it's so fantastically low that really only perhaps an anorexic or someone who has no appetite at all would possibly be risking getting lower than it. For women, I think it's 44 grams or something is the RDA for most women. I can't imagine, any adult woman that can't get 44 grams a day. Like, it's even a question. So
Not in America.
What?
Not in America.
Yeah, you see people eating 20-ounce steaks, and then the government is worried about protein deficiency. It's 2 plus 2 equals 4.
The RDA, eating protein at the level of the RDA can be fine for some populations, but it pretty consistently shows that it at the very least isn't optimal for optimizing a range of measures of health, even including bone health in various populations, including the elderly, and it shows elevating parathyroid hormone, which can indirectly compromise bone status and a bunch of other stuff. So the RDA is definitely antiquated and definitely needs some editing there in that there DRI handbook. So that's pretty indisputable, I think.
Well, with that established, we, I suppose, should move on to the question of what would some better recommendations be? And I guess we could start with sedentary populations. If you were going to set the RDA at a better number, what would it be? And then from there, where do you go for the athletic population?
Okay, and Eric, you can definitely interrupt, chime in, and correct me on this stuff, because I know that you exhausted the shit out of this literature recently in your paper.
In athletes, though, I think you might be better suited for general pop, actually.
Okay. Well, I'll take a crack at this. The majority of the literature on untrained folks will show a lower in untrained and non-training folks. Okay, in sedentary folks, it'll show a lower limit of about 1.2 grams per kilogram, being sort of the lower limit that preserves lean body mass. And if they're observed over time or put on an exercise program. This is untrained folks put on an exercise program at maintenance caloric balance. So we're not talking about an energy deficit, we're talking about maintenance needs. And so the 1.2 number of untrained folks put on an exercise program, 1.2 grams per kilo, appears to be the lower limit. Whereas if you do that same sort of thing on the RDA, then you'll see all kinds of better stuff happening with double the RDA when it's put to comparison. Now, under the conditions of a caloric deficit, depending on how aggressive the caloric deficit is imposed on untrained subjects, like regular non-athletic subjects put on an exercise program, most of the research I've seen cuts off at about 1.5 grams per kilogram as being better preservative of LBM than the RDA of 0.8 grams per kilogram.
Can I interrupt you just for a second?
Yeah.
You're saying exercise programs, and I want to differentiate that. Are you specifically addressing resistance training or no?
A mix of it, like collectively.
Okay.
So can I give some examples here for the people that might not be following these numbers? The 1.2 gram per kilogram number you gave is for an untrained individual. Let's imagine a 220-pound male, untrained, starts exercising, what do we imagine, a few times a week for half an hour. So that
at
number...
maintenance, though, not losing weight.
Okay, at maintenance, that would be 120 grams. And that's you would consider that an optimal number, or is that what the research indicates?
I would call that the lower threshold where you're not going to lose a significant amount of muscle.
Okay, so that's effectively a practical minimum.
It's a practical minimum. It's definitely not optimal.
So a practical minimum for the same person in a deficit would be the 1.5 gram per kilo number, which again for the 220-pound male would be 150 grams.
Yes, and this is for untrained subjects who are not necessarily lean, because when you take a population that is athletic and lean, then the minimal amount that covers your ass in the event of a prolonged caloric deficit, it's significantly higher. And this is only really, there's only a small amount of research on this, and like we were talking about last time, Eric, we've got Wahlberg back in 1980-something? 88. And then we've got Mettler in 2010, and then Garth in 2011-ish.
And then also, I would add Mace-Stew to that list, even though it's observational of bodybuilders, actually natural bodybuilders, which is pretty cool. It does track all the macronutrients, and it has a control group that's not energy restricted, and they were on 2.5 to 2.6.
Okay.
The non-energy restricted was 2.5 to 2.6, or the calorie?
No, the energy restricted was 2.5 to 2.6.
So that's that's where the 1.5 gram per pound number vaguely comes from.
No, this is a 2010 study. The 1.5 gram per pound number comes from guys in the gym in the 60s.
Yeah, the 1.5 number comes from the majority of studies I've seen putting untrained folks in an energy deficit and comparing that with the RDA.
That's 1.5 grams per kilo.
Per kilo, yeah, we're talking strictly per kilo.
Yeah, but
okay. So now when we talk about the trained, lean, athletic population, there's only a handful of studies worth discussing, and even if you really narrow it down, it's like 3 or 4 studies, and Eric mentioned the 2.5 to 2.6 grams per kilo figure, and in Mettler, which big limitation with that study, as we discussed, was it was 2 weeks long.
So just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page, Mettler was 2.3 grams per kilogram compared to 1 gram per kilogram. Wahlberg was 1.6 compared to 1 kilogram, and Garth was 1.6 in both groups, and then Maystu, and I know I'm pronouncing that wrong. Maestu, I think he's Iranian or Estonian, but that was observational of bodybuilders in a caloric deficit compared to a not energy restricted group, and the bodybuilders were taking in 2.5 to 2.6, and they just for reference, they didn't have any significant loss of lean body mass over 11 weeks. Some of them did, and we can talk about that later. But as a collective group, it was non-significant, the loss of lean body mass.
Okay, and pulling that stuff all together for the viewers, it appears that there's an increased need for protein, depending on the population and depending on the state of energy balance. Mm-hmm. So when you take maintenance calories and certainly surplus calories, the protein demand is lower. And when the highest protein needs appear to be in trained, lean individuals in a prolonged calorie deficit. So those are kind of the difference and the disparities in requirements there.
Well, we might as well talk about the factors that cause that, because it's certainly true. But if we assume for the sake of argument that the viewers are starting off with nothing, okay, let's establish why it is a lean person needs more protein per pound of body weight, per kilo of body weight than an obese person, and so forth. So let's establish, on that point I think it's pretty clear, the more fat you have, the more fat you have to be oxidized when you're in a deficit. So the leaner you get, I think the number that Lyle came up with vaguely was the 31 calories per pound of body fat per day.
That was the maximal.
Yeah, I don't know the basis upon which he actually established this number, but I recall that number. So
it was a study from Medical Hypotheses journal. Interesting study, hypothetical.
But regardless of the number, we know that there is a limit to the amount of fat that you can oxidize in a single day. Someone actually asked me about this recently. They said, what if you bulk for 2 weeks and then do 1 day of Lyle's rapid fat loss? And you'll have a 2,500 calorie deficit, and you'll oxidize 2,500 calories worth of body fat. So whatever fat you gained in the 2 weeks of bulking will just be gone overnight. And then you go, and I said, well, I'm sorry, but it doesn't quite work like that. And when I tried to explain it to them, they still were lost. They're like, well, why can't you have that big of a deficit? Why won't it all come out of fat? So there's if you want to elaborate on this, either of you, please.
Yeah, couple interesting points there. First, I wanted to say that another reason why lean guys require more protein is it's just math. Because if we're basing grams per kilogram off of weight, that's not giving respect to how much of that person's weight made up of more active muscle tissue that has protein synthesis going on in it too.
Some people give recommendations based on lean body mass.
You can do that, but there's not a whole lot of research looking at what it should be.
And also the problem is most of the measurement tools are borderline worthless. If you're consistent, you might be able to get away with it. But The calipers, they have quite a big margin of error, 3 or 4% at least. The operator might not know how to use them. Actually, they probably don't know how to use them. BodPod has some huge fluctuations in results. So unless you're getting dunk tested or DEXA scanned on a regular basis, it's sort of hard to make any recommendation based on lean body mass. So,
Right.
and as you said, there's no research on it. So
Yeah.
where were
What
we?
else was I going to address? So there's
I don't have
We're
your notes.
talking
Sorry.
about reasons why would there be a difference in protein requirements of lean guys in a deficit versus guys straight off the couch at maintenance calories.
All right. So other things that might increase our protein requirement. So I'll deal with the most difficult one last. But there is a percentage of calories burned from activity that comes from protein, and it's totally dependent on what the activity is and how glycogen depleted you are, and actually what your diet has been leading up to that time. Because the more of what you eat, you will use more for metabolism. But a rough figure of 3 to 5% of what you do does come from protein, and you can get up to as much as 8% with the right activity if you're already on a high protein diet, if you're doing a certain type of exercise. But a small amount does come from protein. So just the mere fact of doing high volumes of activity does increase your protein needs. So you'll see endurance athletes frequently quoted of having a protein requirement, and probably better to say a protein minimum that's somewhere between 1.2 to 1.5 or 6 grams per kilogram, depending on what review you're looking at. And like Alan said, the greater the caloric deficit, the greater potential for lean body mass losses. So you can make the argument that the greater the caloric deficit, you would have to compensate it with protein. However, that does become a problem eventually if you go too far with it, as you could compromise your fat or carbohydrate intake. So magnitude of caloric deficit, how lean you are, like we talked about, and it is. I could get into the biochemistry of it, but more simply, just think of the less body fat storage you have, the less of a preferential fuel fat becomes for the human body. And this, you could make an argument that it has survival causes, the evolutionary causes of why we're here today, that if we were totally fine with just oxidizing fat as our primary fuel source for everything, we wouldn't have made it across the Bering Strait or whatever an anthropologist might decide. But so leaner you are, higher the caloric deficit, higher the activity level. Also age will come into there. As you get older, you tend to not be as efficient with handling protein. And then also the composition of your diet. You may have heard that carbohydrate is protein sparing. And it's even true that fat is protein sparing a little bit. But basically think of it this way. If you're not eating enough carbohydrate through a process called gluconeogenesis, we make more from protein. And that doesn't go the other way. So if you are on a low carbohydrate diet, your body is going to be increasing its oxidation of protein to create more carbohydrate. So all of those factors can get in there. Probably the most confusing thing is whether or not strength athletes need more protein. And I think the reason why this is so confusing is that the word need is probably not appropriate in the first place. Like if you take two guys who are on maintenance calories and both eating, let's just say the RDA of protein, only 55 grams. If you think that weight training simply increases your need for protein because it breaks down tissue, then if you have these two guys lift weights, that means the guy lifting weights should be getting smaller. But of course that doesn't happen. You lift weights even on a crappy diet, you're going to be bigger than if you weren't. Mm-hmm. So what's actually happening is that weight training partitions, and easy way to say this is that weight training will increase the priority of where amino acids are deposited. So they will increase your protein needs because you need more protein to fulfill all the stuff that got reprioritized away from other body functions. However, you will be more efficient with the protein you take in in your muscle tissue. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it improves nutrient partitioning. So just like physical activity improves glucose disposal, it does very much the same with amino acids. So,
and I wanted to throw in there that the rate of muscle gains in newbies is always going to exceed, at least in a proportional sense, the rate of muscle gain in advanced guys. So, you take a set of newbies and you put them on a suboptimal amount of protein, and these guys have never weight trained in their lives, then they're gonna throw on some muscle, almost regardless. So it's just a different story in the advanced athlete, where you pretty much have to pull out some special stops in order to actually preserve the near maximal muscle that they already have accrued compared to the newbies. So, and kind of on that note, I wanted to make sure that I talked about the idea that protein needs, and this is sort of an assertion that's made by the ivory tower guys. They'll say that protein needs decrease as a result of resistance training. And that statement is too general and too simple, because they're not taking into account a resistance training program that progressively and continually presents new challenges that force new demands on the musculature. So while it's true that if you put somebody on a linear, non-progressive, or just very mildly progressive resistance training program, then you can build a case for the idea that, okay, well, they'll actually retain nitrogen better over time, and thus that indicates a lesser need for the initial amount of protein that they were taking in. But if you apply that concept to a bodybuilder who is dieting, or even not even dieting, off-season programs can be periodized and auto-regulated, and a bunch of stress is thrown at the bodybuilder like month in and month out progressively, and then you combine that with dieting, then it really does not apply that whole concept that protein needs decrease with time. Because if in certain programs, especially programs that are really designed to get results and progressively so, then you're going to you're going to at least need to maintain the amount of protein you initially had, if not increase it over time, depending on where you started at, especially in a dieting phase.
And interestingly enough, the same group of researchers who put out one of the pivotal studies that says basically advanced athletes need less protein also put out a study back in the late 80s showing that novice bodybuilders who go on a new weight training program need a whole lot more protein. So, and I see the irony there, or the kind of the disconnect, but probably a more accurate statement would be that protein needs are decreased when your training does not provide an adaptive stress. Right?
That's cool. It's pretty much said in like one sentence what I took 12 sentences to say. Thank you,
exactly.
Eric.
Ian just did it to me 5 seconds ago. So,
and I wanted to make a distinction too between proportional needs and net needs. Another claim in the ivory towers is that you need less. Novices, like you mentioned, people will say novices need a certain amount of protein, and advanced guys need less amount of protein because they're more efficient or whatever, or they retain the adaptations of the protein dosing better. But there's rarely a distinction made between proportional amount and net amount. So you take a 130-pound novice. I mean, he might require, okay, let's just say double the RDA, 1.6, and we'll have that number right there. And when you compare that to, let's say, an advanced guy, you might figure, well, he needs significantly less than that, but the actual net number will still be higher for the 200-pound guy versus the 130-pound novice. So proportionally speaking, relative to the novice's body weight, he may do better on more because he's still growing and he's still adapting and he's still the body still needs to meet these training demands and these dieting demands in some cases. Whereas the guy who's advanced and he's more skating on maintenance, so to speak, he will have a lesser requirement relative to his body weight, but that net amount will be more. So people screw it up and think, oh, okay, well, 130-pound novice has the same protein needs as a 250-pound, behemoth monster. Well, that's ridiculous.
Well, that's the example I gave in the video that didn't make it was Jay Cutler. I watched a bit of one of his DVDs. I think it was From J to Z. It's like 5 years old now. And he talks about how his off-season diet is pretty low protein and high carb. And low protein for him means 350 grams a day.
Yeah.
And people say, well, what do you mean low protein? I mean, that's so much protein. But in the off-season, he weighs over 300 pounds. So again, people need to understand and this is what I dislike. On a food package, it says adult male, 55 grams of protein per day. It doesn't. I mean, come on! It doesn't tell you anything. So
and that's actually back from not even the DRI days, but the DV days, the daily values, which I think were made.
Did you just say the DLB days?
No, the DV.
Dana Lynn Bailey.
Okay, I just threw an inside joke at you, Eric, and you don't know what kind of joke that was because it's an inside joke. Okay, go ahead.
I'm unaware of the inside joke as well.
Oh, DLB, come on, Dana Lynn Bailey.
100% natty.
Man, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead, Eric. That was terrible.
Yeah, the stuff on the back of the nutrition label, some of the percentages it puts there, those are actually DVs, which are daily values, which are this outdated stuff from the 70s that make the DRIs look like cutting edge, science, but they're left there just because it's a pain in the ass to change all these packages and the RDA rules because it's a bureaucracy. So
yeah, what is it like? The average person is supposed to eat 2,000 calories a day, 300 grams of which is supposed to be carbs. You're only supposed to have 2 grams of sodium a day. I mean, really, come on.
That's one meal of Buca de Beppo, man. Come on.
Yeah, I don't know anyone that takes these numbers seriously. I mean, have you ever met a fitness professional who seriously acts like...
Alan can tell you probably what some of the more mainstream, right out of college RDs think, who haven't had much training in sports nutrition.
There's
do they still think that protein causes kidney failure?
I mean, they'll regurgitate research reviews saying that bodybuilders can maintain on a gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. Advanced bodybuilders can maintain on that. But number one, that's just maintaining nitrogen balance, which, as we discussed, nitrogen balance tends to underestimate nitrogen losses from, denitrification at the gut level, desquamation at the skin, excessive fapping in your midlife crisis. It underestimates those type of nitrogen losses. And not only that, and I also wanted to bring up the idea of carbohydrate being protein sparing. It's almost like a cliche that carbohydrate is protein sparing. But like you mentioned, Eric, protein can actually be more can be more muscle protein sparing than carbohydrate because it provides the raw materials necessary to keep that muscle on. And I actually looked into the research that this whole cliche is based on, and they fed the subjects 0.57 grams of protein per kilo. And they compared it, they kept that constant, and then they varied the protein, they varied the carbohydrate and the fat, and they found that the higher carbohydrate diet spared muscle protein better. But the kicker is that the subjects were taken in less than the RDA for protein. So
I'm assuming the increase in carbohydrates also an increase in overall energy intake sort of followed axiomatically, yes, or was the energy intake controlled?
The energy intake was controlled.
So they brought carbs up and down and fat up and down, and they determined that higher carbs, but the protein intake was so low anyway, it's pointless.
Right. So you can accurately say that, well, carbohydrate can be sparing of muscle protein under conditions of inadequate protein intake.
Right.
How about the argument that excessively high protein intake causes the body to use protein as a primary substrate, essentially, via gluconeogenesis, and that this could potentially have negative consequences in terms of muscle protein status?
I think that has a bunch of potential negative consequences. On a number of hormonal systems, and also on anabolic drive through glycogen status, as well as training performance, glycogen-mediated training performance too. And then there's mood issues as well, and a bunch of that other stuff. So
low carb
I
Corey
think that,
with his sledgehammer.
Oh, the sledgehammer. All right. Well, I think this would be a good segue. I recently got a message. I got a message on Facebook asking me if the video by Twin Muscle Workout, is that the name? Teen Muscle Worship. Teen Muscle Worship. Whether their video on growth hormone and delaying your post-workout meal being optimal for promoting muscle gains, is that accurate and correct? And the answer to that is, well, heck no, it's not correct. And the reason is, in the first place, growth hormone fluctuations within physiological ranges, meaning growth hormone fluctuations that are not caused by pharmacological injections, it's basically a crapshoot. In healthy adults, there is no evidence that I know of that attempting to manipulate growth hormone pulses through the day through nutrient-mediated means, meal-mediated means, is going to do anything at all. And that makes sense, because more important than growth hormone fluctuations, you would want to look at net muscle protein synthesis. So net muscle protein balance, which is the difference between net muscle protein, muscle protein synthesis minus muscle protein breakdown. And then you've got either a negative or positive status in muscle protein. So when you start looking at GH elevations, for example, by delaying your post-workout meal, okay, let's imagine that happens. That transient fluctuation can actually mean jack diddly crap, because all it is a response to stress. Mm-hmm. You can actually raise growth hormone levels from frickin' starving yourself. I've even come across research showing a temporary increase in growth hormone levels when you deprive yourself of sleep. So if you're going to tell me that, well, just make sure you delay your post-workout meal by an hour or an hour and a half or hour and 15, whatever was said in the video, in order to maximize your muscle gains, that's just ridiculous. All you're doing is exposing the body's tendency to overcompensate as a stress response.
Yeah. Well, the same people that say that will also tell you to have dextrose within 3.5 seconds of your last set. And they'll also tell you not to train too long because it will elevate cortisol. So it's they're making a rod for their own back, is the saying. But
right. And I think the fact that the cortisol and GH have been brought up without the correct understanding of the way the hormonal and endocrine system works in the body at all is a good one. So the hormonal system is just basically a signaling system in the body. It tells things to do stuff. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole line of research that is in dispute right now about whether or not training in a certain way to cause hormonal changes is the way you get hypertrophy. And we're finding that we have forgotten the cardinal rule in research of correlation does not equal causation. Mm-hmm. So if you don't understand a system and you notice that every time I train really hard, my growth hormone goes up, and every time my growth hormone goes up, I get bigger, you can make the fallacious conclusion that growth hormone equals growth. And
Nothing to
in
do with the
reality-
training.
Say again?
It's the growth hormone. It's nothing to do with the training.
Right, exactly.
So you missed the forest for the trees. And with
I
the question,
I just came across research that where they administered exogenous pharmacological doses of growth hormone in trained athletes, and they compared that with a non-growth hormone administered condition. Both groups exercise, and they found no effect of the growth hormone. So now there is research that does show certain effects of growth hormone, but performance-wise, it's really crap, and it's really a crap shoot. And in trained individuals, even pharmacological doses are still a crap shoot. So when you're talking about physiological, non-pharmacological doses of and just transient changes in growth hormone within the body, you're really looking at just nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I approach the question in reverse order. If growth hormone is one of the worst drugs out there at all for bodybuilders, it's enormously overrated. Why it is you have guys that are talking about 24 IU dosage and nonsense like this, I don't know. But the biggest benefit is it decreases the amount of sleep you need. And I can see how that's useful. But the belief that it's some sort of amazing ergogen of some sort is just not. There's no basis for it at all. And that's, like you said, that's injecting it. If you're talking about messing with endogenous hormones, it's both arrogant and ignorant to think that you can somehow outsmart the body's own ability to maintain homeostasis. People that talk about manipulating endogenous testosterone secretion, insulin secretion based on nutrient combinations. I mean, they really have no idea how good the body is at outsmarting this kind of nonsense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just, this is treading into a territory that I'm sure Eric wanted to avoid. But to the twins' credit, they mentioned that they were just relaying what they were taught in a sports nutrition certification course. Yeah. So these guys are not necessarily just pulling the shit straight out of their asses. They're just
pulling out of someone else's ass.
They're being taught through their certification course. And I would want to ask them, what the fuck certification course are you taking?
Exactly.
And so I think it's important for people to know that misinformation, it trickles up and it trickles down in both directions. And so it's really important to question where you get your information from, even if it's straight from whatever class you're paying your hard-earned money to take.
Yeah, and it's very common for those kind of mistakes to be made by pretty darn smart people, because they're trying to juggle too many variables, or they're chasing a hypothesis with a study design that doesn't control for enough of the other possibilities. And that's and sometimes you don't know what the other variables could be that might affect what you're trying to test. So I think the real issue is that sometimes researchers, in an effort to be novel and to have something worth publishing, instead of being comfortable saying, yeah, this didn't really, we don't know, all this created more questions, they go, and therefore, and make a conclusion that may be really baseless.
Well, right. Part of it is the scientific community, unfortunately, has become very competitive. A lot of it's just the funding issue. So it would be really anticlimactic to do a study and say, well, this really doesn't tell us anything. It's possible that you could, but no one would want to. Whereas the definition of an educated person, the sort of joking definition, is someone who knows how little they know. So that's what science is supposed to be about. We can learn more, but meanwhile learn how much more we don't know. While what it has been is, well, fighting for funding, so you want to try to make some big jump in knowledge, even though half the time what you end up concluding or offering or recommending is nonsense. So.
Right, and
So just
I
forget about
started-
science and trust the Bible, because it's the Bible is the word of the Lord.
I wanted to mention on that note, Ian, I just started serving on the peer reviewed of the International Society of Sports Nutrition for their journal, the journal of the JISSN. And it's going to take a good amount of effort on my part to not just give the pass to studies for publication just because I find the particular subject topic interesting or provocative or newsworthy.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, it'll be interesting that I'll be kind of working from the back end, approving what studies make it to print and which don't. And there's some really interesting stuff that I'm checking out right now, and I'm actually hoping it gets through. I can't discuss it because it's not, it's a pre-publication, but I'm hoping I'm hoping it gets through. I wanted to talk about the whole thing of dextrose and protein post-workout ASAP type of thing, because that's sort of the opposite of the whole idea that you need to starve yourself post-workout in order to raise growth hormone.
Mm-hmm.
that nonsense. So only recently have acute research, unfortunately, come out showing that there is a protein dosing threshold beyond which no further net gains in muscle protein will occur, regardless of the co-ingestion of a substantial amount of carbohydrate after the resistance training bout. So this was, who's the author again, Eric, of this? Is this Staples? I think it's Staples. I think it's 2010 Staples, maybe, or 2011, but one of those. They fed subject 25 grams of high quality protein. I believe it was whey isolate, maybe, or it was whey protein.
HumaPro.
Pardon?
HumaPro.
HumaPro?
Yeah. Extend.
They fed them, high quality HumaPro.
Extend.
And, they added. They had one group do just the protein, and the other group had 50 grams of maltodextrin in addition to that, and they found no differences in protein synthesis. So, net muscle protein synthesis, which I believe they measured differences in muscle protein breakdown as well. But in any case, they found that there is definitely a threshold dose, at least on an acute basis, to which any further carbohydrate in addition to that really won't do jack in terms of promoting muscle protein synthesis. So that's a new tidbit of research that gives us some insight into why it might not be as important as we once thought to get the old 10 scoops of waxy maize plus your whey and casein hydrolysate in post-workout within 7 seconds of your last set of squat rack curls.
Well, there are two questions here that I've sort of blended together. One is the value of carbohydrates post-workout, and the other question is the timing of your post-workout meal. In terms of the value of the carbohydrates, I think that I can simultaneously say that carbohydrates are overrated and underrated for bodybuilders, and here's why I would say both. I'd say that they're underrated because a lot of people are carbophobic, and I don't think anyone should be scared of any particular macronutrient. I think they're overrated because most bodybuilders, overestimate how many carbs, how much glycogen they're actually using when they train. It's not much. A study was done in New Mexico, I think at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, maybe, I feel like it was done in '89 on bodybuilders, competitive bodybuilders, and they actually took tissue samples from their legs, and then they had them do a 20-set leg workout, leg press. It was 4 exercises. It was like leg press, leg extensions, leg curls, and something else to failure. And then they took tissue samples out of their legs again, and glycogen had only been depleted by 30%. I'll find the study. I'll link it in the description box below when I find it.
39% or something?
We could be thinking about the exact same set of studies. And
Yeah,
it's a range of 6 to 9 sets, for the single muscle group, and that depleted glycogen, depending on which study you look at, between 36 and 39%. So, you may be somebody who does 29 million sets per body part, and let's say you do deplete glycogen. Okay.
Yes.
But even in that event, if you're somebody who does high volume, chances are you are not going to be doing high frequency as well.
Yeah, maybe once every 5 days. So regardless, you're going to have enough time to replete all that glycogen, and you can do it with food that actually tastes good, as opposed to just powder, which is not a trivial point, by the way, because you have people on restricted diets, even a lot of people bulking. They can't eat as much as they want. They don't want to be, whales. So, and then they have their 110 grams of waxy maize in a shake. It's complete waste of the food. So
yeah, it's pretty amazing how the traditional, almost foundational nutrient timing information that's disseminated at basically everybody is based in ultra endurance protocols.
Yeah,
just glycogen depleting after an overnight fast, comparing the rate of glycogen resynthesis between an immediate carbohydrate group versus a delayed carbohydrate group, and at 4 to 6 hours later, oh well, guess which one has more glycogen resynthesized? And it gets kind of silly because, like you mentioned, in the first place, resistance training, as it's done traditionally for bodybuilding and just general fitness, is not glycogen depleting. And even if it was, your only concern would be whether you're going to train those same glycogen depleted muscles within the next 8 to 24 hours, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's kind of a non-issue, and people usually don't think about it beyond the whole idea of, I got to spike the insulin, bro. I got to spike my insulin. Well, why do you got to spike the insulin? To replenish the glycogen. Well, I thought you mainly care about muscle growth. Well, yeah, I care about that too. But now we have data showing that, well, you're not going to promote any more muscle protein synthesis with extra carbohydrate when the protein dose itself is substantial enough.
Or they'll say that you need an insulin spike to push the protein into the tissue, even though there are non-insulin dependent transport pathways, proteins. First of all, secondly, the real function of insulin in this case is not shoving nutrients, and it's the amino acids. Again, this sentence is going nowhere. Let me move back. The way Lyle McDonald puts it is simple. All you need post-workout is protein, because you're trying to do two things. Provide amino acids for the tissue, obviously. So that's the anabolic side of the question. And then the anti-catabolic side is the insulin, which protein will elevate insulin just fine on its own. So carbs actually are, it follows axiomatically because they're a non-essential nutrient, but there's no reason why you have to have carbs post-workout. So there's that.
And I just want to follow that up with the concept that it's fine to have carbs post-workout.
Yeah.
If you're, and of course, if you're an endurance athlete with a multi-stage event in the day, well, then you better damn well get your quick carbs in ASAP and lots of it. But for just general bodybuilding, there's obviously no negative about getting the carbs in with the protein. It's just that the whole idea that you've got to get it in and it's got to be as quick as possible. It has to be as glycemic and insulinemic as possible, the carb source.
Yes. That's
just been totally debunked.
Although the one good point, I think, is that insulin sensitivity is elevated. So if you're someone with a really high carb intake, a good time to consume a lot of carbs is after you train. I think that's one thing that is true. That's one thing that the pseudoscientists and so forth will say, and I think it's a good point. But that's about the only good point they make in that area.
So a question for you guys kind of on the topic of competitive bodybuilding. Hypothetical, we know a few things. So if someone is glycogen depleted, they will use more amino acids for fuel and are thus at a greater risk for lean body mass, maybe, if they're walking around glycogen depleted. They are potentially doing enough cardio, and it may be anaerobic to the point where it's also glycogen depleting, and hell, even intensity aerobic stuff is still about 50% pulling from glycogen. And they're also probably on a low carbohydrate diet, or moderate at least. Would you say that it may be beneficial, considering right now all we have are a whole bunch of acute studies saying, yes, it's important, and maybe 1/3 of the long-term, well-designed studies that say it might be important to get carbs and protein post-workout for the specific case of a competitive natural bodybuilder doing cardio and weight training in the same day on a moderately low carbohydrate diet.
Are we talking deficit or just general?
Deficit. He's competing. He's
Okay.
leaning on a low carb diet.
Okay, I would present a couple of pieces of research at you, and unfortunately I don't have the dates and the authors memorized, but well, one of them I do, at least the author, KEIM, and that was back in I think in the 90s. They compared most of the, and it was a high carbohydrate diet. They compared the majority of the calories eaten in the evening versus the majority of the calories eaten during the day. And the subjects were actually on a structured training program, which is very rare for this type of research. They were on a combination of resistance training and cardio, and both groups of subjects did this protocol during the day. But regardless, the group of subjects who consumed the bulk of their calories of the high-carb diet in the evening actually retained more lean body mass by the end of whatever number of weeks stint it was. And then the other bit of research I'll throw at you, I think this is pretty recent, within the last couple of years, was the study length was 6 months, and they compared carbohydrate basically evenly spread throughout the day, breakfast, dinner, lunch, or whatever. I don't remember the exact number of meals versus all the carbohydrates just kind of slammed at the final meal.
Yeah.
Concentrated at the final meal. Now, interesting. Now, there was no formal exercise program imposed on the subjects here, but if you recall, there was a significantly greater fat loss in the subjects that consumed most of their carbohydrates scooted towards the evening part.
But bro, if you eat carbs before bed, you get obese.
Right? Yeah.
Because carbs are for energy, and if you don't use them for energy, you'll gain fat. Even if you're in a deficit.
You'll just wake up obese.
Yes.
That's what will happen. You'll just.
How about
you won't
people
even
that
be able to lift your arm up to scratch your freaking head, But yeah, what I would glean from those two lines of evidence are that the temporal placement of carbs in the day, mm-hmm. and even relative to the training bout or not, is only consequential if the amount of carbs you have pre-training positively influences your work output during the training bout.
That's the only question, is performance.
Pre-workout.
So, but see, it doesn't necessarily mean pre-workout. I've had people talk to me that that they have better workouts if they eat all of their carbs before bed. It might have something to do. It might have something to do with glycogen, because glycogen isn't synthesized so quickly. So it might be if they eat all their carbs before bed. I could offer explanations.
For me, there's a definite psychological effect. Like if I skip my pre-workout meal, or if I skip the carbs in my pre-workout meal, I almost have this idea in my head that I'm not going to kick as much ass in the gym. So I think some of it can be psychological as well.
Well, what I sometimes do if I'll be quick and then you can speak, Eric. I'm sorry. I don't train. I can't train completely fasted. I've tried and I pass out. That just hypoglycemia like that. But what I can do is I'll have my pre-workout product, which by the way is in production, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll add 50 grams of dextrose to it, and that gives me. I mean, maybe it is psychogenic. It could be, but the amount of difference in energy I have from just chucking 20, 30 grams of dextrose in a shake is enormous. So again, the point is, it's a personal thing.
It is personal.
So in terms of worrying about like, well, you do fasted cardio in the morning, so you have to have carbs after that, and then you have a no carb meal, and then a no carb meal, and then before training you have 80 grams, and worrying. I mean, this really is whatever. It's excessive, unnecessary, and it's waste of time and energy, and isn't going to help you in terms of body composition. So there's that.
Although that being said, I think you also brought up some very good things of the importance of paying attention to how your body responds.
Mm-hmm.
If you notice that if you try to do IF and go train, and you pass out from hypoglycemia, then you probably should have a pre-workout meal,
yes.
right? And I've seen, having worked with a lot of guys and gals who are either doing IF, maybe training in the evening or training in the morning, and on moderate, high, and low-carb diets, and with myself, there is significant individual variation there. And whether it's because a high-carb meal ends up spiking blood glucose and then it goes down, and then they work out and then it goes down even more,
Mm-hmm.
It's causing problems, or whether it's a glycogen synthesis thing like you were saying, Ian, there's definitely something going on there. A lot of the times what I'll do is I will have someone do a refeed the day before their hardest training day if they train in the morning, and I'll have them do a day of if they're training in the evening, instead of putting it approximately on the same day, which you see a lot of protocols these days. You might have, the day you're training, you're on 3,000 calories, and the day you're off, you're on 1,500, and I think that is probably a recipe for not having very good recovery, in my opinion.
Yeah, I've tried that, and it seems pointless. It's because the 24-hour issue is, we talked about this in the video that didn't make it, but you have to draw the line somewhere. You have to say we're going to talk about 24 hours or not, whatever. But some people are excessively reductionist in their thinking. They'll say, okay, so it's all about 24 hours. So for this 24 hours, this is a training day. I've actually had people do these sort of crazy carb cycles where on the day that they're training, they'll have like a 1,000 calorie surplus. And then on the day that they're resting, they'll have a 1,000 calorie deficit. And they think that they're like gaining muscle one day and losing fat one day, and all they really end up doing is nothing. They don't progress at all. So
You want to hear something that's pretty funny? So as a personal trainer for the last decade, what I typically have done with a lot of people is I just have them start tracking their macros and their food intake without any, and this, although just doing this does influence behavior, without asking them to necessarily change it at all, just so I can see what they're already doing.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a whole lot of people out there, especially with when we go out to eat on a not insanely frequent basis, who one day they'll be in a big old surplus, and the body naturally just makes them less hungry the next day, and they'll eat 1,500 or something like that.
Oh, that's always been true with me, yeah.
And now we act like this is some kind of new special protocol where, we eat this. And honestly, that was just me when I was in the Air Force. One day I'd be in the dorms, I didn't have to work, and I'm sitting there playing Halo for 12 hours, and I don't eat anything. And the next day I'm like, oh my God, and I smash a whole large pizza. That's not, that's not IF. That's just being a 19,
Well, yeah, that's
me.
the...
Sorry.
Yeah, and for me, what that translates into in practice is real difficulty bulking, making any sort of progress in terms of muscle gain, because I can eat in a surplus, but not with any consistency. My appetite literally goes to zero after a while. So, and I think you're what's his name? A friend of yours. He's like 6'6". He won a pro card a couple years ago. He's one of your clients. One of 3D.
Let's see. There's Robbie Sardinia. He's
there.
called.
That's it. He talked
Robbie?
about how in the off season.
6'2".
He what?
He's like 6'2".
Oh well. For a bodybuilder, it doesn't matter if you're like over 5'8", you're a giant.
I know.
But I was reading through his log on bodybuilding.com a few months ago, and he says like in the off season, his life sucks. He just hates how much he has to eat.
Yeah. Robbie's set point is like 6%. Not kidding. So, I mean,
I hate Robbie.
Yeah, everyone does. But the thing is, don't hate Robbie, because in the off season, at like 9% body fat, he's like a type 2 diabetic in his blood profile, which I find hilarious. So, so yeah, I'm like 200, probably legit 13% body fat.
Okay. So you bullshitted me, dude. You're not fulking at all.
No, not at
You
all.
swindled me, man. Fulking. What the
Okay,
fuck?
Eric, since you said you have to go soon, what? No, I'm not going to bother splitting it in half. So I'll just there will be a gap in there, obviously, but I'll put it all together. Cool.
Well, I figure we can just do like a. Well, how much time do you think we need to go longer? Let's cap it. Let's time manage here.
Oh, I could talk about boring things like this all day long.
So can I, but I can't be late to work. I can give you guys 30 minutes, and if we can be focused, I think we can do it. What do you guys think?
Well, if we finish everything we need to talk to in 15 minutes, that's fine. But I
Okay,
think we.
I'm gonna take a piss real quick. I should take a piss.
Alan, we have time here. Come on.
All right, hang on.
You have such a sexy chair, Alan. Wood plow.
It looks expensive.
Yeah. Looks like a prop from one of the Star Trek sets.
I know. I want to sit down there and say like engage or something. I think this is going pretty good. This is good stuff. We have a little more focus to it.
Yes.
I mean, we got off on talking about. I remember all the stuff we talked about. It was funny though. That's my only regret is that we lost a lot of very funny, ridiculous comments in the last one.
Yes. Well, we got the seminal fluid comment in here.
We did.
I might
You
as well
actually
just leave
told
this
me,
in here. This footage here, I'll upload it for shits.
There you go.
So,
I want to know how you came across the information of what the macronutrient contents of semen are.
I have no idea. I really don't know, but no. If I understand correctly, it's mostly glucose because that's what the sperm uses as a fuel source, energy source, mostly glucose. And they've actually calculated the energy value of the average ejaculation.
That's hilarious. I wonder if there are more like bodybuilder type sperm that are more like fast two dominant, more anaerobic sperm, and then there's more like the guys who I won't get there first, man, but I'll get there.
Well,
twice.
if you've ever talked about evolutionary biology, sexual selection, and so forth, there's a whole area of evolutionary biology dedicated to studying what they call sperm wars.
Mm.
Because if one man ejaculates in a woman and then another man does, the sperm actually apparently kill each other.
Whoa.
Yeah,
So the real question is if we all did like a train on a chick, who would win?
Whose sperm?
Who would win?
That'd be like a battle royal, man.
I got money on meat because I shoot pretty far.
Isn't your wife like right behind you, Eric?
She just went to work.
Oh, okay. So,
Yeah.
all right. What were we talking about, Alan? Please, your bullet points. What have we not discussed?
Okay. We covered protein need decreasing over time. We did the sledgehammer. We talked about timing. We began to talk about frequency, and I think that the Lane research is interesting with the frequency, which we didn't quite cover. And then I did want to talk about how, what I'd like to see in future research with regard to protein stuff. And then maybe even, I think it would be freaking awesome if Eric could talk about the research that he's going to be doing.
Yes, and we'll give him an opportunity to pimp out his cell tech research links and all this.
I will definitely cyberbeg. Totally.
So where should we start? Should we? I guess the question of Lane Norton's research and protein, bolus, frequency, whatever you want to call it. How
Lane's
often?
a huge influence, and I think put it in context would be good.
What in context?
Putting his research in context to maybe.
Well, yeah. For the people that don't perhaps know what I'm talking about, Lane Norton is, I mean, everyone knows who he is. Come on. What his research or what he has recommended or suggested based on research that he's done, as far as I know, only on rats. So there are issues with this right off the bat. But his arguments are that if you consume protein too frequently, there's a refractory response. Is that the term that he uses?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And he also argues that if you don't eat protein frequently enough, that there's some sort of limit on the extent of increase in muscle protein synthesis that you're going to get out of the meal. So he feels that there's a cap on how many meals you should eat per day, but there's also a cap on how much protein you should eat at one meal before it gets to be just wholly redundant. I remember the number he had was 2.5 grams of leucine, I think, per meal is what he feels. Above that, you're not going to get any additional benefit.
I think he actually has a leucine per kilogram
recommendation.
figure somewhere.
Yeah, I was reading through one of his presentations, but it was from 2009 or something. So I'm hopefully his recommendations have improved. But
well, I've talked to Lane in person about this specifically, and they've definitely evolved over time. And he shared with me some interesting things about what he thinks is going on with the refractory period. And he's not sure exactly what's causing it. I think, remember, there was a point at which he thought it was insulin, and hence the recommendation of eating carbohydrate with the protein, and differentiating between the mono and biphasic response of insulin in response to protein. Hence why hence why you also have to have carbohydrate. And the last I spoke to him, he is starting to think it has something to do with ATP availability, which kind of made me cock my eyebrow, because it almost makes me think maybe this isn't so much of an issue when you're, in a caloric surplus most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's about the extent of which I got to pick his brain. Then we had to go squat, and there wasn't a whole lot of talking.
There wasn't a whole lot of talking, but a whole lot of sacrificing started happening.
Sacrificing to win. Yes.
To win, specifically.
And
we didn't
outworking.
sacrifice for no reason here.
Alan, you've been, as much as you're friends with Lane and you white knight him on the bodybuilding.com forums when everyone in the MISC is like, believes that he's the figurehead of natural bodybuilders that are actually on drugs. Nonetheless, you've been skeptical of many of his suggestions about protein dosing and frequency, and the make sure you use 58 scoops of Extend with some frequency between meals. So go ahead and outline why it is you've been skeptical of his views.
Okay. Well, first of all, Lane and I are friends, and Lane is a brilliant guy, and he's extremely detail-oriented, and in my opinion, just like any other champion bodybuilder, he's just extremely obsessive and compulsive about the micro details, which in a sense, you kind of have to be that way in order to achieve what he's achieved. And Eric too, you're a title holder, you got the pro card, you had to be, nth degree with everything as well. So, and something that Eric brought up last time that's worth tying in, if we were to only discuss research that was perfectly designed with all of our desired variables accounted for and all of our optimal design elements in place, then we would just have nothing to talk about. Yep. So it's a given that we're talking about circumstantial bits and pieces. And so Lane's work on the refractory response and the so-called protein stat hypothesis is based on mechanistic research where infusion is done, amino acids are elevated, and then they look at the fluctuations in the levels depending on just sort of a time course of infusion. So it's a whole lot different than taking a group of people and dragging the experiment out over a period of weeks and see who gains more muscle and or strength with whatever protein dosing distribution you want to compare. Okay, so so apparently, after a certain time of elevating amino acids, the protein synthesis will drop, and then the whole idea that, well, it might be optimal to have multiple spikes of quickly absorbed protein through the day in order to maximize anabolism. That's how that kind of came to bear. And it also, one of the pillars of this idea was a study by, I'm thinking Bohe et al., where they fed subjects a combination of sucrose and I think essential amino acids in a liquid form in between their solid meals. And so the group that had this sort of liquid concoction of carbohydrate and amino acids between the solid meals had more muscle protein synthesis by the end of the study. But it was it was a study that lasted several hours in comparison, as opposed to something that would last several weeks and include a training program and measure concrete, relevant, super relevant endpoints like body composition and strength. That it did not do. But another thing it did not do was match total macronutrition between the groups. So you're not necessarily comparing a timing thing or a distribution thing, but you're also comparing net differences in ingested substrates.
Yeah.
So that's where the confounding elements come in. So, okay, with that said, it's, if I'm recalling correctly, and it's been like maybe a good year since Lane and I have had a good solid knockdown, drag-out debate. Every couple years, Lane and I will have a debate on the forums, and we actually don't hate each other and cuss each other out by the fourth page of the debate, which always amazes people. That's the main thing they get out of watching the debate, which is cool. But he is a proponent of...
Only last about 3 posts on Facebook, so I'm impressed.
Yeah, them Facebook debates, man. But yeah, he's more of a proponent of, I think, 4 or 5 solid meals a day, and not much more than that. Am I correct?
Yeah,
and
I think he said that 5 meals is pretty much perfect. And the truth is, I can agree with that. I think for the overwhelming majority of trainees, 4 or 5 meals works really well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 6, 7, 8 meals is just idiotic all the way around. And then many people like IF, but I think it's a bit of a cult and a bit of a fad. I think it's overblown for what it is. I don't think as many people do well with it as some would think. So
and I think on that note, I think Martin Burkham, who's an extremely intelligent guy, is probably a little annoyed with the way people have taken to IF, because his whole purpose of doing that was to say, look, we don't have to eat 8 meals a day.
Yeah.
This would be just as effective. And now there are people who have reversed the ivory tower and are saying it's suboptimal to eat 3 meals a day or 4. And or now they're getting OCD about the IF thing. Like, okay, can I have 2 grams of BCAA even though I'm only been fasting for 12 hours? And
yeah, I mean, we talked about this in the last video. Again, I'm going to keep saying it, the video we lost. But there are those that are extremist and reductionist in their thinking. Same people apply this logic to if it fits your macros. They say, your entire diet does not have to consist of oatmeal, egg whites, etc. So they refuse to eat any foods of this sort.
Well, I want to circle back, Dryers.
Is it
I want to
organic?
circle back to the idea
Sugar-free,
that Lane
fat-free.
was promoting 4 to 5 meals, but he also wants you to have roughly 5 grams of or 10 grams of BCAA between the meals. I think it's 5 grams of BCAA between the meals. Is that it?
If you do BCAA, I think he likes 3 to 4 grams of leucine, depending on body size, in between each meal. So, I mean, you end up doing basically 4 or 5 whole food boluses with a scoop of Extend or whatever between each meal, essentially.
Okay. Now, I just want to say that I am skeptical that is going to be doing anything measurable if your total protein intake for the day is abundant. And now, at the same time that I say that, I would also say that if somebody has the goal of maximizing muscle gain in the shortest amount of time possible, I don't think that they can do it with one protein dose per day. I mean, from a hypothetical standpoint, I think you would need a minimum, if you really want to just like bet your life on it, the minimum that would maximize muscle protein gains. It's probably not one meal a day.
No.
But are you talking about that simply in a practical sense, which is you probably won't be able to eat enough food in one meal to optimize protein synthesis in the first place? Or are you saying that you really think that there's some sort of need to split your protein? Are you just talking about protein or overall diet is the question?
Because I'm talking about protein, and that was a good... Whoa, I can't hear you. Go ahead.
I stopped. You can't hear me because I stopped talking.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm mainly talking about protein, and I know that the total food thing is a kind of a different issue, but I'm mainly talking about protein dosing because there's these circumstantial bits and pieces of mechanistic research that will show you that protein dosing alongside of the resistance training bout has a synergistic effect on muscle protein synthesis. So I don't think you can rightly hypothesize that having your protein in one fell swoop as far away from your training bout as possible is just as effective as having, for example, a bolus of protein pre-workout and a bolus of protein post-workout.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's huge gaps in the literature as it stands right now, and there's huge gaps in the design of the studies to where we see that protein timing is consistently effective when you do it proximal to the training bout in short-term research, and research that looks at just within-day stuff or even within a few hours of the training bout. Now, when these types of studies are drawn out over a period of weeks, then the effect gets lost, especially if a sufficient total amount of protein is consumed. And the limitations with the long-term research is that they're only using doses like 10 to 20 grams proximal to the training bout, whereas with older folks, we're finding that a 40-gram dose is more protein synthetic than a 20-gram dose or a 10-gram dose. And not only that, but there's a lack of research like Cribb and Hayes did in 2006, where they did a substantial dose of protein, 40-ish grams, with a substantial dose of carbohydrate sandwiching the training bout. Amazingly, no one's ever tried to replicate that sort of design since then. Now it's been just protein doses in small ones, but they still see a lack of effect. So a lot of gaps in the literature there. And for that bout of rambling, I'll just circle it back to, I don't buy into the idea that you can eat too frequently and mess up your gains because of the refractory response. I don't buy into that. But at the same time, I don't buy into the idea that you can get all your protein in one fell swoop in a day and be maximizing the anabolic response. So.
And I think logic, if you really think about it, will have to tell us that. I mean, we focus on the 24-hour period because that's what we're used to as people. But why is it that we focus on a 24-hour period? I mean, and on the same line of it, if you go to some of besides intermittent fasting, there are some people who will fast 24 hours. And at what point does it matter? And it has to matter at some point.
Yeah.
I think we can logically do that.
But that threshold has not been systematically investigated. There hasn't been a temporal dose response investigation that's ever been done with that. And I just wanted to mention, I think that Martin would also agree that all your protein intake in one dose for the day wouldn't be optimal. Compared to maybe a certain amount pre-workout.
Something that isn't mentioned is that a good number of people that do intermittent fasting don't just eat one meal. It seems that intermittent fasting has now become synonymous with one meal a day, whereas most of them have this maybe 8-hour window, so that many of them eat a big pre-workout meal, train, and then eat another big post-workout meal, which has all of the bases covered by default in terms of anything you could say in terms of nutrient timing.
Yeah, intermittent fasting is pretty reasonable when it comes to fasting, definitely.
Yeah, I've always said that one meal a day doesn't make any sense to me on a practical basis. What I've tended to suspect is that if someone can cram in all of their food, maybe in an hour, that the amount of time it's going to take to digest and absorb all of those nutrients will make up, in a sense, for the fact that it is only one meal. But, you know, the point you've made essentially is that we can't make really definitive statements about this because there's no basis from which to do so.
Sure.
Yeah.
And when we talk about just muscle retention purposes and what might, be fine for the non-athlete and all that stuff, there's a ton of research showing that you can go through 20-hour fasting cycles and still reasonably retain LBM. But when we talk about what's optimal and what's pushing things to the nth degree, like what competitive bodybuilders would do, then that's a whole different game. And I'm wondering if we have enough time, if Eric has enough time to talk about some of that contest prep stuff, or whether he's just flying on out of the office.
No,
Here's the thing. I don't think any of us are going to die anytime soon. It's statistically unlikely.
Okay.
So we can probably do this again. What I would like you to, though, Eric, to do briefly as it needs to be, outline what your research is going to be and how people can give you money.
Great.
And then if we want to go, we really could, in a couple months or whenever, do another one of these videos entirely dedicated to what the topic was going to originally be, which is just about contest preparation. But
okay.
And we can leave it there, and you can go off to work and not lose your job and all this.
Well, the funny thing is I'm only working for another 4 or 5 weeks here anyway, but I'm moving to a different country. But nonetheless, I like my job, and I don't want to just not teach my... Anyway, so my research. And I think we could probably do it sooner than a month from now, by the way. I'm sure we can fit in another Skype session, maybe even this week. But my research is trying to answer the questions that we currently cannot answer with the research we have right now. So I'm going to be doing a 1-year master's, and the downside of that is that my advisors really want me to keep my intervention length of the protocol to about 14 days, so 2 weeks, kind of like Mettler. We're going to just kind of tease you again, but hopefully this time we'll be able to use some differing protein protocols, because another sad part about looking at just Mettler and Wahlberg is that we only have 1 gram compared to 1.6 or 1 gram compared to 2.3. Mm-hmm. So we're actually going to be comparing something that is more common in the literature, recommended for protein intake for athletes, like 1.6, to something that's a lot higher. Like, I think we're going to go 2.8. Okay. So,
which is right in line with the habitual intake of competitive bodybuilders.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So we'll be looking at guys who have a certain level of body fat. So we're only going to take lean guys. We're only going to take resistance-trained athletes, and we're going to clamp the training. We're going to put them on a deficit, and then we're going to feed them into 2 different groups, and we're going to do a crossover. We're going to feed one group the 1.6, and then one group the 2.8, then do a washout, flip it, and run it again. And although it's only going to be 2 weeks, it's going to tell us, it's going to flesh out that story that Wahlberg and Mettler have begun to look at. And then from there, my PhD, which will be the 3 years after that, we'll try to do something that's more along the lines of 12 weeks, which will... I'm excited. Just unless someone published something before me, it'll be pretty damn novel. So
is your PhD work going to be in New Zealand as well?
It is. So I'm going to probably be there for about 4 years.
Lord.
That 2-weeker you're going to do, what exactly are you going to measure? Because we were talking about how
he's obviously going to measure nitrogen balance.
Has its limits, and now we're getting more sophisticated with measuring, directly measuring fiber hypertrophy and or MRI for muscle volume, as opposed to just nitrogen balance stuff. So,
you get me excited. I think I just popped wood. So we're going to do MRI, right? We're going to do MRI of the upper arm and of the calf, and I think that's mainly because the MRI we have access to isn't big enough to do other muscles.
Nice.
damn pragmatics. We're also going to do nitrogen balance, but primarily so we can point out if there are any issues with it.
Yeah. Just to
We're
say how bad it is.
We're also going to just do straight up body comp. I think we're going to go with hydrostatic weighing. There's a possibility we could do DEXA, but then they told me the costs, and I thought we might stick with hydrostatic weighing.
I've seen wacky shit with DEXA, though, man. I mean, I really have. It's one of those things where I think it's elevated to a status it doesn't necessarily deserve. So, you need the 4-compartment model if you really want to get down.
But see, I mean, hydrostatic weighing has, they're big inconsistencies. Bod pod is the most overrated. The bod pod is just, you'll get a 3. You could do the test, and they say 15%. You do the test again, and they tell you 19%.
You wear the wrong type of spandex, you're screwed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, we have to come to terms with the best way to measure body fat is on cadavers.
Dissection, which I do with my clients all the time.
Yeah.
He gets them cut up.
Yeah. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to take a cohort of lean, dieting, strength athletes on traditionally recommended protein intakes for strength athletes, and then compare it to upper end of what's been seen in the research to be safe. I think I was able to convince my advisors that 2.8 would be okay because I trotted out a research study showing that it doesn't cause kidney damage. There's still a lingering fear of the safety of high-protein diets. But so we're going to compare 1.6 to 2.8, 2 weeks. We're going to measure a nitrogen balance, hydrostatic weighing, MRI, 1 rep max on a leg exercise, an upper body exercise, power on a force plate. We're also going to measure anaerobic power, so like a 30-second Wingate test. And the goal here is not just to give some information to bodybuilders, but also weight class athletes who might be in the same position. Like if you're talking about an Olympic weightlifter who's trying to cut down, or any kind of anaerobic strength athlete who's doing weight training, like a sprinter who stays relatively lean. There is a whole class of athletes outside of bodybuilding who do resistance training quite frequently, are lean, and have to make weight. And that process requires them to be on a caloric deficit. And I think right now they are woefully undernutritioned in general if they're dealing with a sports nutritionist telling them it's only 1.6 grams per kilogram. Anecdotally, I don't know if you guys have ever watched some of the linebackers in the NFL over the course of a whole season. And I've noticed visually they're getting smaller. And it's probably because they can't weight train as much, but maybe we could figure out a protein intake that would help these guys out. I don't know.
They don't have access to the same drugs.
No comment.
I don't watch professional sports at all, so it doesn't mean anything to me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I don't know what's going on, but I think it has some pretty cool applications outside of just bodybuilding.
Aren't linebackers like 350 pounds anyway?
They got good genetics.
Yeah, they're like 250. Tiny guys compared to.
They're like 350.
Who are the really fat football players? The really grotesque whale-like.
That's the linemen.
Okay, whatever. Yeah, see, I don't know.
You jock you.
There's nothing more boring to me than watching millionaires smash their heads into each other for fun.
How about watching?
So you're not too much into MMA?
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely ignorant. I don't know. If you tell me that was a 3-point score in basketball, it doesn't mean it's complete white noise. Like there is only one God and Muhammad is his messenger. It doesn't mean anything to me.
Well, you gotta concentrate your energies where they count, man.
No, I
don't really watch any of the sports with any frequency at all, except for the fighting sports, boxing on occasion. I mean, MMA, I love it, and bodybuilding. I'm just like this crazy stalker bodybuilding spectator fan. I'll never freaking compete. I can tell you that much. Never. I have no desire to.
There's
But holy shit! I mean, I love to. I'm such a fan of the pro bodybuilding ranks.
Yeah, you two might know about Matty. What is his last name? Is Matty H on the forums? He's like huge.
Right, Matty with a bunch of numbers after it.
Yeah. I love how he went into the IFBB section last year and he said, if you say no to a girl for sex so you can watch the Olympia, there's something really wrong with you. You're like mentally ill, because he said as fun as bodybuilding may be to some people, come on, it's like, oh no, we can't fuck tonight. I have to watch men in thongs. I think what he said was you have to question your sexuality at that point.
What does the girl look like, though?
Of course. No, everyone on the MISC only has sex with 10 out of 10s,
Yeah, well, I would need a subjective rating of hotness before I could decide whether I watch Olympia or not.
Well, no, if her elbows are too pointy, then you have an excuse.
Elbows too pointy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, Ian, I will send you the link to my cyber begging website for my research funding, but
Lovely.
It's micro giving, and I'm going to do a little blog post about where my research is and then put it up, and I'm probably going to upload that in a week or two and then have my last about 60-day push to make some more money so we can hopefully afford to do hydrostatic weighing and all the stuff I was talking about.
Okay. Lovely. And
Thank you.
Ian, want to thank you and Eric for doing such a bang-up job, and I hope we were nice enough to everybody out there, including TMW, and everybody else. Louis, Marco, we salute all you guys, actually. We salute all of YouTube. Can we do that right here now? We just salute all of YouTube.
Let's salute. Ian, there you go. All right.
Sure. Whatever. Salute you daily, whatever you want. All right. Well, it's been lovely, and thank you again, and we shall do this again.
Word.
All right. We'll leave it there. Everyone watching, make sure that you subscribe, and make sure that you join the No Bullshit Bodybuilding Facebook page, the link to which is in the description box below. And whenever I have information from Eric in terms of how you can give him all of your money that you probably would have spent on drugs anyway, so this would be a better use of it, I'll put that in the description box below as well. So hurry up and do that so that you don't lose out on all the potential cash of all these people watching. So anyway, thanks again, gentlemen, and thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you.
We're out.